It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod. Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of the Sod Pod. In the last episode, we were joined by Conor Quinlan. He's a dairy hygiene manager with Grassland Agro. Very insightful conversation about dairy farming and milk quality in general. On this episode, we're joined again by our consultant vet, Bernard Furlong. Bernard featured way back on episode 7, The Vet's Perspective, and of course followed by episode 8 on Pica. Welcome to the show, Bernard.
Thanks very much, Jim. Lovely to be here.
Not a bother, you're always welcome, and it's always great to have our consultant vet to be on hand all the time to answer some of our on-farm queries. What issues actually are prominent this year? Is there anything standing out this year, Bernard?
There's nothing standing out any way worse than any other year, I suppose. You still have going back from the spring, you still have a lot of E. coli, mastitis and milk fevers are probably your two stick-out ones from a cow's point of view, I suppose. As regards then maybe younger stock, you still have plenty of pneumonias, and lungworm was an issue there maybe a month ago. Plenty of pneumonia throughout the year. So then if you move on to calves, then I suppose the main thing you'd see with the calves, I suppose, was you're standard enough with scours and pneumonias when they're younger. But moving on then to grazing calves, I suppose the summer scour syndrome was probably had a big part to play in older calves or grazing calves this summer period, I suppose, you know. It's an evolving disease. We're not 100% sure of the main causes of it, but I suppose it's multifactorial, you know. There's a lot of issues going on there with that one, you know.
Yeah, you could have 1 year and then you mightn't have it again for another while.
Potentially, I suppose it's what's causing it. It's predominantly a nutritional issue, I suppose. When you have a lack of fibre, maybe less than 40% of the dry matter of the diet of 40% of the dry matter of the grass, and if you have high quantities of sugars being ingested from lush grass, that's when you start to pick up a lot of this. And then they're being fed meal on top of that. So with the high levels of sugars within the meal, the lush grass, and certain other management practices, then it can lead on to the summer scour syndrome. People would often worry that is it coccidiosis or salmonella or a high worm count, but oftentimes all those are nearly ruled out, and then you're left then with these bunch of calves that are scouring. And to be honest with you, when you're left with it's more or less nearly a disease of exclusion. You rule out all other things. You look at the management processes, such as being fed lush grass and not getting access, I suppose, to hay or straw on pasture.
Yeah. As grass quality has improved, it's probably become more prevalent, hasn't it?
Probably has, sure. I suppose there's probably higher levels of nitrogen and other various proteins within the grass structures now. It's just probably not, calves are just not able to keep up with it. The main problem, I suppose, really is it's just rumen development. The rumen is not fully developed when they go out to grass, and they just can't cope with it, and then you end up with scouring calves, and if it gets really bad, you'll get ulcerations around the mouth and around the muzzle area as well, and obviously ill thrift, poor coats, things like that, you know.
Bernard, I was chatting to Kevin Sheehan from down in Waterford, and he rears a few calves, and what he said works very well was helping to transition them off milk and giving them access to Pica grass, to try and get them to transition over onto the grass. So that probably
be sure,
a benefit.
Similar enough to that. Like I would have always been told that you're probably better off before they go out to grass that the calves have access to fibre in their diet, in the shed. Like, so that might be a month out. You might just throw in a bale of straw or a bale of hay into
hay or straw, Bernard.
I'd lean more towards straw. I'd put straw in the hay racks, to be honest with you, even though it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but there's more fibre you're going to get more fibre from the straw. With hay, I suppose it's probably much of a muchness really, but I'd lean more towards straw,
Probably a bit dustier as well.
Probably a bit dustier too, actually, yeah, it might be, and that as well, and not every farmer would have hay anyway, they just wouldn't have it, predominantly a lot of the dairy farmers,
Then, I suppose and in the west of Ireland, it's still worth
investing. It's different, yeah, we're down around,
getting a bit of straw is probably better, is the main message, isn't it?
Yeah, just get fibre on board. Straw down around here in the southeast would be a lot easier come by, I suppose, too, but it's I suppose the take home points really from the summer scour syndrome is just the rumen. As soon as the calf drops, the calf's being fed milk, then maybe it might go on to milk replacer, then it might go on to it's getting a bit of meal, then it's getting a bit of you're throwing in a bit of hay or straw in with it as well, then all of a sudden it's going out onto grass. So there's just a lot of dietary changes within a short space of time over those couple of months, before they go out to grass, that when they go out there, then the rumen just might not be fully developed, and then we lead on to this,
And then treatment, bringing them back in, putting them back on milk.
The treatment really is the mainstay treatment is a management treatment. So what's that? Is just put them back in on the shed, put them in on a comfortable straw bedding. Don't put them back in on slats. I see some people doing that, and it's just not comfortable for calves, number one, and it's probably cooler as well for calves, and just not a great environment. But just put them in on a nice straw bed and put them back on hay, and limit the meal as much as you can. And as soon as they dry up, then maybe leave them for a few weeks just to really hone in on getting the small intestine and large intestine to heal up and the rumen, and then put him back out onto the put him back out with the rest. Then again, please God.
Yeah, I see other lads maybe not cutting a headland or a couple of widths of the moor before they turn out calves. Traditionally, calves sometimes are put on onto aftergrass, so you have that more fibrous stuff as well.
Yeah, traditionally calves should be just put out onto the fibrous grass, like just real kind of stemmy grass. But I suppose in years gone by, like, we've been driven not to do that, like, you know, we've been told not to do that. But ideally, kind of a bearish enough paddock, I suppose, with stemmy type grasses, ideally what you're looking for. You might slow down the growth rates. I suppose there's a fine line between getting the growth rates right and coming up with summer scour syndrome then on top of it, like, you know.
Yeah, but the calf paddock, like, is generally close to the yard and probably poorer quality, but that probably leads into a few problems then with...
Yeah, sure, look, if you do have, I suppose, look, we all use the same calf paddocks year on, year in, you know, and that can lead to maybe a high level of worm burden as well. Now, we did run with Paralabs this year, we did run fecal egg counts for a lot of the clients, and I think we ran a couple of hundred of fecal egg counts, and with that I just done a brief summary of it there yesterday. It's not completely perfect, but I just took, of all the egg counts that we done, only 86% of the animals of the egg counts didn't need a worm dose. Now that's anything from cows to heifers to calves, so I didn't get a chance to individualize those different groupings, like. But it just goes to show, like, you know, there was a lot of overdosing being done, and a lot of those farmers probably would have dosed for worms otherwise if they hadn't done those fecal egg counts. And it's as simple as that, like, you know.
Yeah, and all those stock would have had access to the V Fight as well, which obviously has the antioxidants and anti-helminthic properties as well, which is helping to reduce that worm burden. Because we recently did our roadshow, and you have some staggering figures on the resistance, Bernard, of, you know, the conventional wormers that we see day in, day out. You know, like, there's a huge challenge there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a huge challenge there. I remember I was at a talk once, and can't rightly remember what vet was talking, but they did say that. What are you going to laugh about, John?
I was just saying that's a great introduction to the poor man who gave such a brilliant speech. Like.
That was a good speech, alright, but I can't remember. But anyway, it was a Zoom. And what they mentioned was, I suppose, your three main worming groups, I suppose, are your ivermectins or your macrocytic lactones. And with the macrocytic lactones, about 100% of the Irish farms are coming up with some levels of resistance. With the benzimidazoles, which is your Albex, your albendazole or Albencare, you're coming up with something like I think it was 70%. And off the top of my head, then with levamisole, which would be like your Levicide, or traditionally it was like Nilverm years and years ago it was called. It was somewhere between 60 and 80% as well. Now they're all kind of rough estimates, but it just goes to show they're well and truly above the 50% mark, you know. Yeah. So there is high levels of resistance, and it's unfortunate because they are and were great worming products, but I suppose we just used them too much over the last few decades. And if you keep using something over and over again, worms will just gain resistance genetically to them, and that's just as simple as that. We're just breeding for resistance then, like, you know.
And that's just, I suppose, very similar to the challenge we're facing with antibiotics, but we're trying to be more proactive in safeguarding those as well. Sure,
it's very similar to the antibiotics. We're trying to safeguard our antibiotics by doing a lot more selective dry cow therapies, for example, and it's no different then to the wormers. The wormers were a licensed merchant product, and now we're trying to get them to a POM product now, like a prescription only product. So it's the exact same. We're just trying to safeguard the drugs so that they can be utilised to the best of their ability, not just used the whole time.
But I suppose you explained it very well to me, Bernard, that some of the drugs that we were using are very similar to the ones that are used for humans. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, well, sure. Look, I suppose, for example, the first one to come to mind would be Sinulox, you know. Sinulox is an injectable antibiotic that can be used, say, for maybe a calf with pneumonia or a cow with summer mastitis or any type of mastitis. We can get it in a lactating tube format as well, and that's the same antibiotic that might be given. Your doctor might prescribe that to you if you had a chest infection. It's just amoxicillin clavulanic acid. It's just augmentin Sinulox, the same active ingredient. So there is a crossover. plenty crossover between the antibiotics that the animals use and obviously that we use ourselves, like, and that's what's pushing all this one health approach, whereby we limit the use of antibiotics and only use where necessary, and keep the good ones safe and don't use them as much as we can, and use the lesser ones, we might say, more frequently.
And that's something that you've managed to achieve probably this spring, that you know, where you would have had these hard-hitting antibiotics, I describe them as. You've managed to come around that with
like
anti-inflammatories and
exactly. Well, sure. Look, I give one example. I suppose we don't like I was probably very bad in a way. I used to always use Marbacil an awful lot as a vet. I'd go out to a cow with E. coli mastitis and I would have used Marbacil. Calf pneumonia, would have used Marbacil. Marbacil, I suppose, is your it's a fluoroquinolone. It's one of these antibiotics that needs to be kept at bay, you know, that we don't need to use. And I suppose this year, the veterinary practice that I work with, we decided we wouldn't buy in any Marbacil at all. So we don't even have a mil of Marbacil in the practice. And to be honest with you, our cure rates are fine. We don't see any difference in our cure rates, whether it be for E. coli mastitis or pneumonia. It's one of those antibiotics that needs to be used very, very, very sparingly, and we've managed to achieve that, and I don't see any difference in our cure rates at all. I don't like calling one antibiotic better than the other, but I suppose a lot of farmers would account for,
be farmers,
that's the one that everyone says, like,
that's the holy grail.
That's the holy grail, like, and then they might
that's your Tony Kelly of antibiotics, like.
Oh yeah.
That's your banker, like.
When he's missing freeze though, is it? When you really wanted him, huh?
But we still managed to beat Wexford, I believe. But anyway.
She's not saying much there now, anyway. But anyway, so what was I trying to say there before you? Yeah,
I interrupted you, but yeah, like, it is possible. I suppose what you found is that we need to get better at that herd health approach, that prevention rather than cure. The vaccinations obviously are very, very important.
Strategic use of medicines.
Yeah,
that's pretty much what it is. Like, not just going out and saying, right, calves are out there now, I'm just going to bring them in for a dose. Next 4 to 6 weeks, I'll bring them in for another dose, and just continuously do that. Like, you know, it's about just using the medication when necessary, and not just at will. Like, you know.
What I find very interesting, Bernard, my kind of view of the vet would be vaccination, medication and crisis management, you know, so it's an area last resort. But all the conversations that you have, they're always about going back to the environment of the animal and his condition and everything. So in other words, the vaccinations are great. There's your prevention, the medication because we've got someone sick, or the crisis management, there's an animal down or whatever, but you still keep going back to the basics of housing and everything, which is a great insight into the vet. It's not just about
that's it too, I suppose. Yeah, sure. It's like everything, prevention is better than a cure, isn't it? Like, you know. And sure, if the animal is only as good as its environment, you know. So if you have the cow's cubicles in good nick, the cows will do well. If you have the calf pens in good nick, they should do quite well as well. Like, you know. I'm sure it's all about hygiene, keeping the moisture down. If you're talking about cubicle houses, it's all about just keeping the moisture levels down. Less chance of then bacterial build up. Talking about ventilation then as well, we could talk about that all day as well, like, and we done a few of those tests on farm there this week as well, the smoke bomb tests, just to try and show the guys.
Actually, just explain that for anyone that's not aware. So this is where we're inside in the shed.
So this is Dave Corbett's little thing at the moment now. He just loves going around with his bucket of straw and firelighters and just lighting up sheds. But I know on a serious note there, Dave just decided he was mad to do these smoke bombs. He was googling up smoke bombs and all that. But I think
were onto him. They were worried. They had to get onto him immediately. Like, that he was continuously.
It's this weird quirk this lad has. But
the dark web.
Yeah, but basically we just we're up in County Down, I think, on Monday, and we just basically a metal bucket, firelighter, no different to one you'd have at home, and just a bit of straw, and lit that. Just let it up, and then just place it on a ledge, or on a concrete ledge there, just on the middle of the cubicle shed, and we're just demonstrating that the heat should rise. You know, you don't want lateral flow of the smoke to just disperse across the shed. You want the smoke to rise upward and go out through the outlets that are present on that shed, and that's what it done, you know. And it's just showing that basically the heat off of all these animals, all these cows in the cubicle shed, it rises, and as it rises, then with that, from the inlets around the through the space boarding or through that are lower down on the ground, it drags in all the fresh air, and then the hot air rises up and the fresh air can come in then as well, and there's this constant cycle then replenishment of fresh air coming into the house.
Obviously Bernard, Grassland Agro are not advocating anyone set any fires in any sheds, but the actual test is great in a controlled environment, with the expertise.
Yes.
But maybe some of the older sheds you might be able to see these problems.
Yeah, the older sheds that probably weren't always, say, the calf shed, and where traditionally you had machinery in it or other things going on, and now all of a sudden with the big numbers on farms and all that, they're being transferred into a calf shed. So it's quite useful on these kind of calf sheds just to demonstrate, is there ventilation? You'll often see with ill ventilated sheds, you'll have a lot of cobwebs, or you'll have maybe water trickling down the galvanized sheeting there on either side of the shed as well, like, you know, just signs that there's poor ventilation, not enough moisture being gotten rid of and things like that.
But
like, you know?
A calf shed is a tricky thing to design because you want a good enough airflow, but you don't want any drafts, and you don't have any stacking effect because you don't have enough. You don't have body weight in the
body
shed
weight to create that stacking effect. Yeah, there's not as much heat off of calves as there would be off of obviously a few cows, like, you know. So it is going to be harder to create that. And as well as that, I suppose you're putting calves into those calf sheds are quite busy, say in March, and we all know March is the month of many weathers, like, so you could go in there one day on a Monday and it could be very warm, and then Tuesday it could be very cool. It's very hard to get that ambient temperature correct. You're looking at a temperature somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees Celsius to get that, you know, a nice temperature for calves. Obviously you want it as dry as possible. We can talk about that in a minute. And then I suppose thirdly, you're looking for no drafts, like, you know. And they're very key. Like, it's very key to have no drafts. Like, this tiniest little hole can create a woeful draft for calves.
We were on the farm, Tom Murphy there, doing a super job and very good facilities out in Innishteague, and you made the comment, Bernard, that listen, calves can live a little bit, you know, cool or a little bit damp, but a draft is a disaster.
Draft is the killer. And I suppose, look, if it's cooler, you can always, the weaker calves or the younger calves, you could throw a jacket on them, like, you know. They're becoming quite common as well.
They're very popular, yeah.
They're very popular, yeah. A lot of our clients use them and they seem to get on quite well for the ill ones, the ones that were sick.
Some people are doing it as standard now.
Standard enough now, yeah, they are, yeah. I suppose then.
But the draft is a disaster.
The draft is a disaster, yeah. And you'll know that yourself. You probably have to get down to the calf's level, so maybe you might have to just kneel down and you'll feel the draft coming in. You might not feel it at your own head height, but if you go down to the level of the calves, that's where you might feel the draft, and that's what you don't want, like, you know. You're really wanting to stay clear of drafts. Like, calves hate drafts.
There's a great point there with the calf probably only floating around 2.5 foot at height. We walk in, you don't feel that draft. Do you know, for those 6'2", 6'3" guys, maybe some of the more modest men like myself, 5'9" and a quarter.
Don't say that word.
4'12" and a quarter.
But like, we're in and we feel no draft. It's to get down to calf level, just to something cutting in under.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I suppose if we are to talk about moisture as well, it's all about keeping moisture at bay and keeping it away at all times. And I suppose that's where the Actisan might come in as well. If you want to discuss about that there a small bit, John.
Yeah, I suppose the Actisan is a drying and disinfecting product that will actually kill bacteria, which is very, very beneficial in that, you know, high risk environment where you have a young calf that's building its immune system and developing its rumen. You know, trying to minimize as much bacteria as possible. Staph strep and E. coli are obviously three of the main ones from mastitis point of view, but they'll also help in the calf pen, the calving pen as well.
Calving pen is a big one.
Because that is a big one, Bernard. Like,
a lot of traffic goes through that.
The 6-week calving rate is a key KPI in relation to the economic performance of a farm, but it's putting savage facilities, or putting savage pressure, I should say, on facilities, like, because I always explain to farmers, sometimes you see, do you know, the old calf pens where they might only be 4 foot tall.
Yeah.
You wouldn't stand up in them. Well, maybe Jim would, but that was a low blow, and that, no pun intended, but
geez, like, well done.
Do you know, they're tiny, they're very unfit for purpose when you're talking about, you know, good airflow and whatever, but they weren't heavily stocked, but we're putting so much calves and so much pressure on facilities.
A lot of throughput going through there in 6 weeks. Like, you know, you more or less, you could say 80-90% of these cows are calving out in herds in 6 weeks, like, you know, so a lot of pressure goes on it, like, you know.
One of the other things, Bernard, as well, and we were chatting about, like, the textbook and what's practical are two different things. Like, in the textbook, you should be cleaning out every calving pen after every cow calves, like, but
it's physically not possible. Like, you know, biggest problem now, I suppose, on dairy farms is labour. You know, no one can get anyone to do anything now anymore. Like, you know. So everyone is struggling to get people to milk the cows for a year, do various other tasks on the farm. Like, there's any amount of farmers that are looking for full-time workers, let alone part-time workers. Like, you know, so like they're stretched. Like, you know, farmers are stretched. So
hugely, yeah.
I find that Actisan is good in another way. It's for an ammonia benefit as well. It absorbs ammonia. You know, there's nothing worse than going into these calf sheds or calving pens, and you can get this real stench of ammonia. And what that does really is it can damage, if you're breathing that in, it can damage the respiratory tract and lead on to various different types of pneumonias then in animals, like, you know. And
not only it absorbs it, but it doesn't release it again. It locks it in.
Yeah.
So then that gets down through the slats into the slurry, and it's putting that back out in the soil. Then we go spreading our slurry again, which is a great benefit.
Yeah, that's very important, because that ammonia is obviously respiratory impacts on calves as well. Like, you know, it's not just it can have an impact, but yeah, I think the selective dry cow therapy then is another big one that we have coming down the track quick and fast. Probably some of the main bullet points are hygiene around drying off and probably doing your milk recording, Bernard.
Yeah, it's a shame. There's a significant number of farmers that haven't done any milk recording this lactation. Like,
still as well. Still this year, yeah.
Still this year, yeah. Like it'll be very hard for vets to prescribe an antibiotic at drying off without at least one milk recording, and that's what we're being told now, that at least if a farmer could get at least one milk recording in between now and their point of drying off, get the results from that, and at least from there we can see, right, that cow is very high cell count, maybe she's too high, maybe she just needs to be culled, she could have had a few clinical cases over the case of lactation. Then you might see a group, all the heifers might come back fairly clean, like as you'd expect. They could have quite low cell count, and all they might need then is a tube. Like, you know, every farmer is different. It depends whether you're struggling with cell count and you have a very high cell count, or if you have a very low cell count, what your cut-off point should be, whether you should go for selective dry cow therapy where you go to tube only, or whether you need to, say, blanket treat, say, all the late lactational cows. Like, it really just depends, like, you know, what your cell count is.
But any farmer has to they should definitely do a milk recording now, and then do a milk recording in spring and see.
Oh, you're looking at 4 to 6 times a year realistically. Like, you know, you need a trend. It's like all these things, you want a trend, like a trend in space, a trend in time, and trend with age groups. Like, so you might see it's all the older cows that are coming up at high cell count, and they're continuously high, or they might be low in May and high in June, low in July and high in August. That to me, and they're all quite old. That to me would indicate to me more than likely it's a Staph aureus, it's a contagious mastitis issue, and that to me means those ladies just have to go. Whereby you could have an environmental mastitis whereby it's only high maybe around, say, after calving, and it might peter off after that. Then the persistently infected animals might just peter off over time.
And Bernard, we were down with Pat O'Hearn in Bride Park in Connacht as well, and, you know, terrific farmer, great facilities, really good breeding, like, but we spoke a lot about vaccination and maybe the importance. And there was one thing you said if you were going into the mart in Ross to buy weanings and bring them home, you'd absolutely go with the Bovipast. And
I go with the IBR and the Bovipast, yeah. So I'd probably go to the Marker Live IBR vaccine, and I'd go then with the Bovipast, and then come back in a month's time and go again with the Bovipast again as the second shot. The IBR just requires that one shot. It should give you a 6 months cover into the muscle, 2 mils into the muscle, and then with the Bovipast then it requires a booster then 4 weeks later. And if you do that, then you're covering a lot of bases. Like, so I suppose if you're talking about pneumonia in those weanlings, like, those weanlings are quite stressed. They've just been weaned. They're in a different environment, new farm, mixing of groups. So you could be buying, say if you bought 5 weanlings, they're probably more than likely from 5 different farms potentially, like, you know. So there's mixing of animals, completely stressed psychologically, nutritionally and environmentally, like, you know. So it's completely different for them. And when you're stressed, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get sick. And just IBR is probably it is the most common cause of pneumonia in Ireland for weanlings. And then with the Bovipast, then you're covering 2 other viruses and a bacteria to go along with it. So you're more or less covering that complete range of respiratory issues. Like,
getting, you know, a lot of cover because pneumonia.
You're getting a lot of cover, exactly. Yeah. Now it's like everything. No vaccine is 100%. You need to keep the environment as best as possible for those guys as well. Do you know?
And then for our dairy farmers listening, what's due now? Salmonella.
Sure, I suppose we're into this time of the year now. You're looking at, before dry off, then you're looking at salmonella. You know. So cows again get stressed it's just a reminder, I suppose, this time of year. Cows get stressed around dry off. Salmonella is quite prevalent, causes abortion in cows in their last trimester, and then after that, then you're looking at the calf scour vaccine, the Rotavet Corona.
When do you do it, Bernard? That's a contentious
12 to 3 weeks prior to calving.
Sure, that's half the year.
Sure, different. Well, sure, depends, but you might have to, probably better off dividing up your spring calving herd maybe in two, and
by
do
calving day.
By calving day, obviously, and then maybe I don't know, like try and aim for maybe 5 to 8 weeks before calving if you can at all, like, and just double check with your lay calvers that they are within that range, that they are between the 12 and the 3 weeks, like, it is imperative to do that. We've seen a few people this year, they skimped on that vaccine. I know it's an expensive vaccine, but it's more expensive when all these calves are coming up a rotavirus scour, and they only done the lay calvers, but it still didn't work out for them, so.
And Bernard, very last one, you're recently after getting into show jumping. Congratulations. How is that going for you so far?
I'm a groom, John.
You're a groom,
I tack up the horse, I put up the poles.
Trainer?
You could say that. I'm a trainer, yeah. I just want the horse to jump really big every day because it looks cool.
Yeah. You're supposed to say you want everyone to be safe. But,
but I know we'll be in the RDS there maybe in 2 years' time.
Bernard, anything else there just before we do wrap up from your own point of view? I'm just conscious we're coming to the end of autumn and we're stepping into the winter window. If you were to give one piece of advice to a farmer before we wrap up, what would it be that you would say would be something to specifically focus on?
I suppose if you were to think of it at all, I suppose body condition scoring. I'd be trying to get people to coming up to drying off. I'd be trying to get people to look at the body condition scores of their cows. If you have a very fat cow, maybe milk her on a bit longer. If you have a very thin cow, maybe dry her off that bit sooner. Or maybe put her on once a day milking and feed her up plenty over the dry period, so that she'd have a proper body condition score of somewhere between 3.25 coming up to calving. That is imperative. It'll cut down on all those production diseases such as milk fevers, retained fetal membranes and displaced stomachs, and if you can get on top of that, you'll do yourself justice going forward into the spring next year.
Just put up that little bit of condition before calving down up to that 3.25.
Yeah, if they need it, and if they don't, and if they're too fat, obviously, maybe milk them on a bit longer. But still, I would give them the dry period, all right, and maybe just restrict their feeding then over that dry period,
Brilliant. Hey Bernard, the key message I take from everything you've said here today really is strategic use of medications. Also in housing, well ventilated, but no draft. Get down on your knees, or I can stand high according to everyone else, and just check out that there's no drafts there that can really upset the calves and add real stress into the environment. Keep that moisture at bay. Bernard would recommend, one of his big recommendations there, no weanlings coming from the mart. Get the IBR and the Bovi passed into them straight away, because you're bringing in the outside influence. You wouldn't be too sure of the immune system, etc.
No, you don't know exactly what maybe they have been vaccinated for that already, but you couldn't guarantee on it. You couldn't take someone's word for it either, to be honest with you. That'd be my view on it.
Yeah, dead right. So that's it, lads. Mind yourselves out there. Farm smart, farm safe. Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.